We are live once again. It's been a while
Should I say?
since we actually.
Yeah, yeah.
It's been a while since we actually did one of these podcasts.
Yeah.
'Cause
Things get it. Where
we were
life happens, I
we
guess.
were down bad for a while, but we're
Yeah.
back here with another Frontier Workshop podcast, episode 4. And today we got a very interesting topic to discuss: maps.
Map enthusiasts.
We are we are very enthusiastic when it comes to maps now. We're going to talk about layouts, aesthetics, interactions. And to top it all off, we got a very interesting discussion about AI. And you're probably wondering what that's got to do with maps. Well, it doesn't. I'm just kidding. No,
Well, you're off right there.
yeah,
It sort of doesn't, but how the map plays, it does. So
yeah.
there's
Well,
a lot of
it
there's a lot
does,
of
but it doesn't. But
yeah.
it does.
When it
You'll
exactly like
understand
when it
when we
comes
get there.
to doing maps, there's a lot of things that go into map design that may not directly be a part maps, but are definitely part of maps.
It may not be
So,
relevant at first, but
but it connects.
your feeble brains shall understand soon enough. But first, hey Theris, did you know something? Did you know
No,
something? We have a Discord now.
do
We have a
we?
Discord. Yes,
What?
we have the Frontier Workshop Discord.
Oh boy, how did this happen?
If you're enjoying this series, then why not come join the Frontier Workshop Discord? You can meet other Titanfall enjoyers such as yourself, engage in community activities, and even get early access to podcast content. If you have your own ideas that you'd like to share with us, then come on down to the Titanfall 3 workshop. Not only can we help you visualize your ideas, but you will also become a part of the creative process behind the scenes. And who knows, maybe your idea will be featured in an upcoming episode. So what are you waiting for? Click on the link down below and become an official member of the Frontier Workshop Discord. But now, we get into what really matters, maps. And what better way to start off a discussion about maps than talking about map layouts? And for this section of the podcast, I want to actually draw our attention to some previous maps that we've seen in the franchise already from Titanfall 1 and Titanfall 2. So, any memorable maps for you, Theorus? For,
I do like.
not to put you on the spot, but tell me
Oh yeah,
the top 5 maps in the Titanfall franchise right now.
Christ. Well,
I'm just kidding. I'm not gonna put you on the spot like that.
Hanger.
What the hell's Hanger?
Yeah. No, I'm just throwing out words.
Foundry,
Smuggler's
Frostbite,
Cove is fun.
Glacier, Nuketown.
I love the difference between Frostbite and Glacier. It's just, it's subtle, but it's there.
Nah. So when we actually look at the map layouts for a lot of the maps, they are pretty similar when you think about it, and it's not uncommon for these modern games to have this 3-laned map design. Because if you look at a lot of the Titanfall maps, they do follow that like 3-lane principle. Glitch follows it. Boomtown follows it.
A lot of the newer maps follow it,
Yeah.
but what's interesting is a lot of the old maps from Titanfall 1, not so much. Like it is there.
Titanfall 1
Like
did a very good job with its map design
yeah,
and
like
its layout in general.
Relic follows it, but it follows it in a different standard. Like Relic kind of has like a 2 to 3 version of it where 2 lanes are dedicated to really Titans. Or 2 of them are mainly Titans, but there is like a 3rd lane there that is for pilots and how they navigate, which
Yeah, you
is a
talk about
very
the
good.
inside of the dropship.
Well, yeah, and then there's the inside of the dropship as well.
Oh,
Lagoon
right.
is another map that
I don't.
has a flow. Like it has technically 2 lanes. well, 3 lanes if you want to count the entirety of the lagoon, but that's massive.
Yeah.
But that's what's interesting about these maps is like there's 2 things that are standard, and then like there's the third thing that kind of goes wild and kind of sets the scene for the map.
And
So
even though a lot of these maps, or not a lot actually, but the 3 lane maps, that there's actually a lot more lanes you can actually take due to verticality. So
mhm,
using Relic as an example, you got that bridge section on one of the spawns that takes you up and into the dropship, and then you got a
mhm.
route underneath it where you can actually go underneath the dropship and come out on the other side of the map. So verticality is another aspect of like map design that's
uh,
utilized very well in the Titanfall franchise.
so you know, it's not a dropship. It's the Odyssey.
The
It's
Odyssey, right?
integral to the
It's the
backstory.
capital ship that like McAllen hijacks it, and he like blows off a thruster in the first game. We get to see it fall off like the cliff when we're playing the quote unquote campaign of Titanfall 1.
I didn't think you knew as much about that as okay.
No, yeah. Um,
but
map.
but no,
Other maps.
there are a lot of different ways to go about maps in general. And if we're talking about layout, like you're saying, like there's the 3 lane, and there's some that are really iconic, like Training Ground, which everybody knows from Titanfall 1 if you've played it. It's the most standard 3 lane that you can possibly get.
And then you got like
And
three
and
lane
then you can get
maps.
yeah,
So
and then you can get like things that subvert that, which is like Rise. Rise is a maze essentially, where like
Rise
there
is three
are
lanes.
there yeah, there
Yeah.
are 3 lanes, but there's just how you can bob and weave, and like it's divided into 2 sections where like the top half of the map there really is no floor, but it's dedicated to pilots because of the walls, and the
It's
bottom half of the map is Titan based because it's wide, it's open, and that's why a lot of people I believe enjoy it is because of how it's just essentially 2 maps stacked on top of each other. And even though there's 3 lanes to the map, it feels like there's actually like 20 because of just corridors, and it's almost like Venice with just little waterways that go throughout the map, even though it's a desert. But
You're
you get
probably
the
gonna
idea.
hate me for saying this, but I despise Rise.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I
I
think
can
I'm one
see
of the
that.
only people that actually hates Rise, but like, but no,
I
the points you make are still valid, even though
yeah,
I don't like Rise. I don't like Rise, but I will admit that I do think it is like sets a good example for what maps should like aim to be. So like
exactly.
you can have the standard like 3 lane formula, but you could still add like verticality and new routes for pilots to take. When we say like 3 lanes, it's 3 lane for like Titans, and then usually you have those like open areas at either end, and then you got like a separate 3 lanes for pilots to take, and like you said, it's like 2 maps stacked on top of each other, and then you got maps like Demeter, Airbase, Boneyard, which like completely throw out the 3 lane principle and just make a good map. I think Boneyard was actually one of my favorite maps from the first game, and it's so interesting the design when you think about it because it's essentially just a big hole, right? You
Hmm.
spawn on 2 hills, and then you go down the hills into a big pit, and it has like carcasses, and it has a couple huts, and then along the outskirts there's more. There's like a hangar on the left side, and on the right side there's like an anti-air turret. But Boneyard is a great map, and because of its layout, it's a really vertical, and I think I'm a bit biased because I think all the Titanfall 1 maps are good in compared to Titanfall 2. I mean, why would Respawn like introduce maps from Titanfall 1 if they weren't like good? Because like half the DLC maps, I think all but one DLC map was from Titanfall 1, and I think Respawn knew that that's where they put all their effort into the map design. I'm
I don't
rambling a
know,
bit.
like
But
in terms of like DLC map in Titanfall 1, I enjoyed a majority of them. Uh Dig site, I have a lot of fun at. Sand trap, I think it's interesting. I think not a lot of people played it because it was like the towards the end of when the game started dying off. Uh, Zone 18 kind of gives you that like trench warfare vibe.
I really like Zone 18,
I do too. I think
actually.
it's a very good map with a lot of hidey holes. It changes up a lot of things. Um, yeah, it's like
I think while we're
and like
talking about map layout, we're talking about more like specific things now. I think this is the perfect time to segue into points of interest. So like
yeah,
you
and
mentioned like there's like trenches um Zone 18, and then going back to Boneyard, you also got that massive skeleton which like looms over the map, and you can actually get
mhm,
on top of that skeleton, and it's just so freaking cool.
and like and there is like let's see what's a easy like I mean we'll go to training ground because it's easy
Training
and
grounds
it's the
is
first
easy,
map that most people play in. There are 5 points of interest in training. There is the two turrets or the four turrets I should say,
right? On
the
either
two on
side,
each side. Yeah.
and then you got
So
the long
and then you
building
have
in the
the
middle.
center. Yeah, and it's really straightforward. It's a symmetrical map, and the points of interest are those turrets, which basically give you coverage for your half of the map, and it's something to interact with. It's something that gives the player an incentive to I should go here to hack this thing, and then it gives the enemies the incentive to be like, we have to kill that thing because it's hurting us.
Right.
And then
And
there's the center of the map, which is a point of interest because it divides it in half, and that's where you're gonna meet the most conflict, and that's where the actual shelter from the turrets is. I mean,
yeah,
does it play out this way? Here or there, but that's the idea behind the map,
I think
and it's
Training
very good.
Grounds does achieve that point of interest like
No, it
idea
does.
really well, because you'll notice that a lot of the points interests are connected by zip lines, and I think that's actually a really smart idea to connect all the like points where we know that combat is going to get funneled into, and connect them
Mhm.
through zip lines, and you can like bounce around them really easily. And
And I feel like a lot of people don't like training grounds, and there was a mix up like when it comes into Titanfall 2, like that they strayed away from zip lines and they focused more on the aspect of, well, you got grapples now, those are your zip lines. And the thing is
I think
what I liked about zip lines is it was a clear, you don't need a grapple, it's point A to point B. The other thing is in at least training grounds, there's not a whole lot of walls to wall run on outside of the main center
yeah,
building in which it's awkwardly shaped. So a lot of the core mechanics don't really work on training ground that they implemented because there's not a whole lot to you outside of those zip lines, which gets you to the center of the map and gets you to the edges and the points of interest really quick, which is good. But where it falls flat is a lot of the selling value about the game, the wall running, the double jumping, and all that, the verticality, I should say,
mm.
is lost because it's a very foot soldiery map. It is a training ground, so
I mean, even
they
so,
nailed it.
you
But
like say like verticality, that like massive building in the middle is like the highest
mhm,
point on the map.
it is, and
Yeah,
that's where all the snipers would
I
sit up there and at
yeah,
you.
I want to talk about an incredibly underrated map from Titanfall 1. Do you remember Overlook?
Yes, I do.
I think
The military base, right? Well, that you can run
it's a
around
prison,
and
essentially.
is it a prison?
Yeah, in lore, it is an IMC prison, which I think is very fascinating. And it's got that massive airstrip that you
Yeah, no,
can
I love
walk
the
out.
map.
But when you look at Overlook, it's separated into like three different sections. You've got that massive like open airstrip where it's very tight and dominated, and then you got essentially two funnels that go through the middle of the map, where you got
Hmm.
two massive walls that pilots can just go crazy on, and then you got like the small little hangar section where Titans can like sneak their way into as well. But Overlook, I think, is actually another map that it doesn't get a lot of recognition, but I think Overlook is a great map, and it balances pilot and Titan gameplay perfectly. I think the most important when it comes to Titanfall, the most important thing that comes to maps is being able to balance like Titans and pilots together. And the way you do that is you
Yeah.
have like clear Titan routes. They can go. Titans can pass through the map, and then pilots can just kind of like jump between like little corridors or wall run above them, and they need to be able to have routes where they're safe as well, or they can risk it and like go out into Titan territory and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, well, when it comes to maps, being able to balance um pilot and Titan gameplay should be like priority one.
It,
And
it, one of the maps that I really liked was Haven, and I liked
Haven,
Haven
yes,
because it was a city essentially. Like I mean, it wasn't city, but
it was a resort.
it was almost like two maps in one. There was a map like if you want to just fight pilots, you go inside the buildings, and
Eh,
that's what I loved. Like
Fun fact about
each
Haven:
it was a
every
resort.
building is an
Mhm.
interior. There is an interior to
Yeah,
every single building, and it's so incredibly detailed. Every interior, yeah,
and not just that. It's like if you're in a Titan, there's a whole different map that is the outside, and the buildings contribute and provide a different flow in how you travel the map. And it's like it's essentially two maps, and they still mesh together and they interact really well because of like where you can sit and like get anti-Titan weapons and things like that. Although I know people don't like the map and it didn't receive a lot of love, mostly because you can poke from the windows very easily on Titans, and uh, Titans it's hard to kill pilots when all the pilots are inside the map. But I enjoyed it, and I still think it was a very well done map because of there's two different playstyles to it. And when you get your Titans, you go Titan centric. And
there's
but
that
I guess
massive
what I'm getting
beach
at
where
is
you can go
people,
onto as well.
yeah, but because like the two different sides of the map like meshed very different well, and it's also for pilots, it was very easy to get lost inside the buildings, like lose where you are because
Right.
it's a big map. But that's a different subject. What I'm getting at is that the pilots and the Titans weren't constantly at odds with each other, because like the point of a Titan, the reason why you have to deal with them is that they steamroll a whole bunch. But mostly when you get your Titan, and if you're the only Titan on the field, you're just killing a whole bunch of grunts because all the pilots are killing each other inside the map. So you have to get lucky when they
And
cross.
other
But
Titans.
yeah, exactly. But I feel like if this map was to ever go into Titanfall 2, it'd be a vastly different story because grapple hooks can get you on walls. Like stim is a lot faster in Titanfall 2, where
And
you can just get and cross scraps, and you can make more risky plays, which would give more opportunities to Titans to challenge you. So
when you actually look
yeah,
at Haven as well, a lot of these buildings are so enormous, and so flat as well. So to like port that over to Titanfall 2, wall running on this map is going to be like
it's one of the
insane.
funnest things.
Yeah,
Uh, so
because I'm looking at one of the buildings now on the map. It's like in the center, and it's got the big spa sign on it, and it's just a
mhm,
big flat rectangle, and it's
mhm.
just perfect for wall running. And you can actually wall run between all the buildings in Haven and never actually have to touch the ground. And
Yeah,
it's
and even though Haven doesn't really have a whole lot of points of interest, what's good is
the whole
the
map's an
it's
interest.
it's a well, the whole map is an interest, which is one thing, but it's the fact that if you're a pilot, it forces you inside. If you're a Titan, it forces you outside. So it kind of the flow of battle is dictated by who has what and where you can be. So the whole point of interest in the map is the interior of the buildings, and you play around like inside these luxury resort. I don't think it's a casino, but it's like a luxury resort essentially, and
There's a
and you can
spa, there's a hotel, there's a I think there
yeah,
might be a
and
casino on one of them. There's a greenhouse.
no, Yeah, and it's the fact that there is that. So you don't necessarily need a point of interest. I don't think there's even turrets on the map or anything
No.
like that. And the map isn't necessarily worth changing to do that, but it's the idea that when you play this map, there's always something to do, and it should. And maybe if it had like a few actual interior points of interest, it would help with the people getting lost inside the buildings. So, and maybe that's
I
why it's a
mean,
little bit more
I
underrated of a map.
think
But
there are. You say there's like no points of interest, but I think like yeah. Actually, you did say this. The interiors are like points of interest
yeah,
for
they are.
pilots because when you actually go inside, uh,
Mhm,
they're two different maps, like you said. But the interiors of all the buildings are actually really huge. I
mhm,
remember this. I think it's the spa where you go in and it's like this big window on one side and then three walls, and it goes up like 3 stories, and it's just a big box where all the pilots can actually come in, and it gets really insane if you've got frag grenades. But that is like a point of interest for
mhm.
pilots who are like scouring the interiors. But I think
But like moving a little bit forward, something else to note is like all like if we go into like the aesthetics of these maps, every map has a clear layout except for the prison apparently, because I didn't know that Overlook. I thought it was an airbase. All right, I thought it was an airbase.
oh, airbase
Who
is an
knew it was
airbase. The
who knew it was a
map
prison?
airbase is
You
an
did, I
airbase.
guess.
Um,
But
so before we go
but
into aesthetics, I want to like talk about my favorite map from Titanfall 1, which I personally think has
okay.
the best layout. Export. I think Export
I
is
I don't remember export.
Export was
I
the
all I
last
remember from export is
DLC.
it has the shock cable that kills
Yeah.
things. That's all I
Besides
remember from it.
you being able to like get up onto that shock cable, and
Mhm,
that kind of being able to shoot it goes into like map interactions, which we'll get to in a sec. But I think Export is the best example of a 3-lane map that supports pilot and Titan gameplay. It's it has a lot of verticality. The whole map is essentially on a ramp, right? A massive like 45-degree incline from like the waterline up to the hill. And you got 3 lanes, 3 roads where Titans can pass through, occasionally divided up by like open areas. At the top there's like a massive square open area. But in between all these lanes, there are buildings, a lot of buildings where pilots can get on top of and actually look down on these lanes, and they can jump from building to building. And I don't know, I can talk for about Export for hours and why I think it's a great map, but it's essentially just the perfect 3-lane map, I reckon, and one that isn't talked about enough. But yeah,
I mean,
now we go into what you were
I
saying
was gonna say
earlier
like
about.
I mean I like corporate because it's a very simple map that does a lot of the things. It does a lot of the things that Haven does, but I feel like it does it in a slightly better degree because it's a little bit more
Okay.
lane focused and less chaotic than
And Titans
Haven.
can actually go inside that big main
Yeah,
building. Okay, so
yeah, they
we're
get to.
talking a lot about like Titanfall 1 maps and Titanfall just like
Well, yeah,
normal maps.
that's what I was going to transition
What
into,
what we should
believe it or not, I was going to use export as the example for
yeah.
hazards, and a lot of the hazards actually go away from Titanfall 2 outside of the death pit.
Yeah.
So
Would you even
so
yeah, I suppose they would be hazards.
I mean you get the death pit almost in a lot of you get it in war games, you get it in uh what's the map called?
Okay, I remember. There's Glitch, War Games, Crash
Okay,
Site actually has a death pit as well. Um,
okay.
fun fact, there's like a little wall running route that you can take on the left side of the map, and there's like a big pit that, or like it's like a cavern, right?
Mhm.
And it's a really cramped like wall running route, but you can actually fall to your death in it, and I think that's not many people
I
actually
mean
know about that.
that's like saying that's like saying like a forward base has a death pit because if you just jump off the edge of the map, you'll kill yourself.
No, no, no,
Same
like
same
no, no,
thing
no,
with
like Crash Site actually has a death pit, like War Games and Glitch.
Okay.
It's not like the edge of the map.
I know it does. It's a very small one, I think,
Yeah, but like a death
because
hit
it's
nonetheless.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
talking about
it's fair.
map
It's fair.
hazards, and also I just
Yeah,
mentioned that.
yeah. But going back to like export for like the 2 seconds that it's there, it has like again the shock cable that you can activate to just murder some fools, which you know is very good. And I feel like more maps need a
Interesting.
hazard, or I guess they don't need a hazard, but they need a thing that
Makes them unique.
aids. Well,
Oh,
well that's
sorry. What are
subjective.
we talking about? We're talking about like because you mentioned
Map hazards.
aesthetics as well.
Wait, and that's why I wanted to cover aesthetics first
Yeah,
before hazards because
let's
like
actually talk about aesthetics then. Yeah,
yeah. So
because we kind
Haven's
of like
aesthetic is that it's a luxury resort. Everything's nice to look at, and it tells you what it is. That it is a city that you can run around in, and that's what you get. So you don't need anything it doesn't need anything really else because its aesthetic really sells the map itself. Same thing with Overlook. There's a lot of like things to overlook in terms of like where you can go, what you can look at, what you can do that helps Overlook.
right.
But when you go into to
When it comes
maps
to
like Training Ground, it's all gray. There's really nothing to look at. So that's where you need like the points of interest of like the turrets, which that becomes the hazard of the map when you interact with it. And then when you go into like export, you have that cable. But export itself is not necessarily a bad map. It's like it's I think it's like a shipping dock or something like that. If my memory
export,
fails me on it.
when I'm talking about like aesthetics, I think aesthetics is important when it comes to like just remembering a map or like looking at a map and like. Sorry,
Well,
I'm
yeah,
kind of
like
like, hang on, I'm having a
I could talk about corporate, and everyone will remember the giant Titan statue in
yeah.
the middle of the map.
Aesthetics are what make a map like
A
interesting.
map.
Because yeah, it's what makes a map. Because without the aesthetics, a map would just be a bunch of grey boxes and lanes to go down, and that wouldn't be very interesting at all. They'd get and all the maps would blur together. And I'll like in terms of like the
And
Titanfall universe as well. Aesthetics
let's take
add
like
scale
Swampland.
to everything. Yeah,
Yeah, let's take Swampland for an example.
Swampland. Right.
Swampland has a very key aesthetic to it, which is that it's in a swampland and there's tall trees. But it utilizes that very well, where you can wall run on the trees, you jump, and that's where it gets its verticality from. Outside what is normally a very level map, there's not much. There's all I think all of like really two stories to the map, which is the actual swamp and the dirt. But the trees give it a lot of. It allows you to break line of sights. It allows you to wall run on and jump and maneuver very quickly from one point to another. It's a very good map that is utilized by the aesthetic of literally just tall trees. So I guess that's like the best example I can
And
give into how
Swamplands,
aesthetics can play to the map.
yeah, Swamplands has a lot actually going for aesthetics because it has like alien ruins as well and like what are they called? Cryptics like
Yeah.
on walls. And if you actually look on one of the mountains, you can actually see like a massive statue. I didn't actually notice that until recently when I saw it on a Reddit post. But
Yeah.
Swamplands, yeah, is a great map when you're looking at aesthetics. It utilizes it so well, and that's why like Swamplands is so memorable because you got it's. When I talk about aesthetics, I'm just mainly like interested in like what makes a map cool and memorable. And I
No,
think
I get it.
when comparing Titanfall 1 maps to Titanfall 2 maps, there's really no contest when it comes to aesthetics. Because
Yeah.
Titanfall 1, you got a map with a giant drill that's like digging into the side of a mountain. You got Swamplands with like massive trees. War Games, which is like a simulation where it's like glitching in some parts and like combining parts of the map. You got
And
Boneyard with a massive skeleton carcass.
and I feel
Uh,
like that was something that was lost in Titanfall 2. Given the gameplay is a lot faster, it's a lot more clean, and honestly, it is better gameplay
yeah,
than Titanfall 1. Uh, the major downside is a lot of the maps in Titanfall 2, even though they are, I can remember each one, they're almost too small. And I know the reason why is because it's to keep the the fight together. Like you're always a bullet away from hitting the next guy. Like they're supposed to be close, sort of close quarters, but
Compact.
it, yeah,
Yeah.
compact, I guess is the proper word for it. And but
Okay.
very few maps properly like go to that extent. I mean, Glitch is one of the ones where it's very simple. It's probably one of the best Titanfall maps because it's just borderline symmetry to the point where people have modded it to be like you can flip between there's a mod that you're able to flip between the light side of the map and the dark side of the map, and all it did was just because the map is directly mirrored, you're able to flip from one side to the other. That's different. Besides the point,
Oh,
but
I know what you're talking about. You're talking about like the ice pick mod that like
yeah, or
allows you
something
to
like
edit
that.
map. Yeah, but like,
It was on North Star, but it was a very interesting
oh really?
flow to it.
Okay.
Um,
Um, sorry.
but what you lose in tight maps like that is a lot of the open area where you get to explore and see kind of just interesting parts to the map
A
and
lot of
and
the
develop.
interest is in favor
Yeah,
of like a good like map flow, and that's where you gotta like strike balance. You gotta make a map like
yeah.
feel interesting and have like a unique feel to it whilst
Like
being like
like I like Boomtown, but Boomtown is a very boring map.
it is. It's just a
Um,
city with like
yeah,
it's just a small
it's a
town actually.
destroyed yeah, it's a destroyed city, and the thing is as good as Boomtown is, it's kind of like a worse version of corporate or Haven because it's the buildings that you go inside aren't very rewarding. There isn't. It's a corridor
Yeah.
to kick you right outside, and I know that's to aid the Titans, and I know there's a reason for it, but because it's just there's a lot going for it, and there's very little going for it at the same time.
Whilst we're talking about aesthetics, I want to
Yeah.
actually talk about how aesthetics contribute to like the scale of a map, because I'm going to
Yeah.
compare like Titanfall 1 to Titanfall 2 maps right now. So in Titanfall
Okay.
2 maps, there isn't actually a whole lot of scale to the maps. I'm looking purely at the Titanfall 2 original maps. So Angel City we're going to remove, Colony we're going to remove because they're all Titanfall 1 maps. And
Okay.
when you look at like Homestead, Boomtown, Forward Base, Kodai, there's like it's a map, right? Surrounded by just big walls, right? Big rock walls. A lot of them are actually like that, and I don't know. That just seems so boring. Like, sure, Forward Base has like the satellite in the distance from like from the campaign, but it's
Hmm.
just a JPEG image, right? And in terms of scale, you look at like Titanfall 1 maps. You got Outpost 207, which is on a moon looking at a planet. It has a giant death laser looking at pointed at a space station, and you have massive frigates engaged in combat like above the map as well. And like you look at that and like, wow, this map is actually huge, even though it's not. But like the scale of everything that's happening around you is actually huge. You got Smuggler's Cove as well, which has like massive mountains behind like a dam, right? And then that's one
Hmm.
side of the map, and then on the other side there's like a massive water area. We're going back to like swamplands. The like trees themselves are huge. You got like stuff out in the distance as well, and all of this adds to like aesthetic and scale to a map and makes a map so much more interesting and so much more memorable. And in my opinion, it makes a better map, even though like
Yeah.
the flow may not be like. I think I'm one of those guys who would rather play on a more interesting map that has a great like execution with like color and scale instead of having a map that just flows better. Like
Yeah.
that's why I think
Take.
Glitch is a great map. Sorry, I'm gonna finish this thought and then I'm gonna let you talk because I know you're trying to say something. But Glitch is a great map. I'm not denying it's a great map. But I would prefer to play on any map from Titanfall 1 than Glitch because the Titanfall 1 maps aesthetics are far better. You
Yeah.
can talk now.
And what I was gonna say is take Eden. Like you have Eden and you have Crash Site. Crash Site I think is actually better. I think Crash Site has almost every part of that map on is somewhere that you can openly fight, and you'll have a different
What?
interaction. Yeah, you'll have dinner. You'll have dinner with
Dinner.
McAllen.
We're gonna have
James
dinner with the
McAllen.
enemies.
He'll come out. Yeah. No, you'll have a different interaction. Like you got the little cave off to the side. Every part of it, and it doesn't feel too cramped. Even though that's kind of the point of Crash Site is it's a little bit more narrow, a little bit
Yeah.
claustrophobic. But it's very well done in that there's long lines of sight, there's ways to break cover. It's the aesthetic of it is there's a giant ship just crashed on top of you. Like the aesthetic is very well done on Crash Site. The only reason why Crash Site it gets old is because everyone plays it and they get like, okay, we need something new. The only other map, like I said, that does something similar but to a lesser degree is Eden, and Eden loses it because on the open edges of the map,
It's
especially
just
towards I guess like the train side,
the
where
like
the
top area.
docking.
I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
it's a little too open out there. There's nothing
There's
really
actually
out there to
there's
keep.
nothing going on.
Yeah, there's nothing going on. Like there isn't a build. If they put a single building or some trees or just
They
something to break
have like
cover,
these
or
oil drills or something like that
yeah,
out
like
there, and
that
then
would
they're
be
just
fun.
scattered around.
But there's really nothing to take cover behind or to utilize or to be interested in. And again, points of interest also coincide with the aesthetic. You can make an interesting point of interest,
Whoa.
but like the idea is, I guess the main difference between aesthetic and point of interest is an aesthetic to a map is something that can benefit the map in interest but not necessarily draw the player to it. So if you did oil rigs out there, it's an interesting thing to the map that makes the map feel a little bit
There
more
are
like it's
oil
a gas
rigs.
it's a gas mining station, exactly. So because you can go to that place, if you had like little oil things mining out there, you can sit behind it and it gives you some cover,
Oh
so
man.
it adds to the map while making it feel less dead.
Sorry, you're
Maybe it's not a
actually
point.
talking about
Yeah.
like like the actual playable part of a map. I'm talking about like beyond the boundary, like the skybox area. I was getting
Well,
confused.
yeah, I mean, I
It's
was going to get into that a little bit more, and like so because like at the same time there's the edge that you can just jump off, and that's kind of
got
what happens to a lot of the maps is that there's an edge to a map.
right. Of course.
But yeah, so you get the oil rigs, and you can feel a little bit more towards the map. But again, Eden feels dead because there's not a lot of aesthetics going on when you're at the edges of the map, that's what I was getting into is the edges of the map. Where Crash Site has very defined edges. Like the walls, the everything is a little bit destroyed. If you go into the cave has certain lights and zip lines, and the aesthetic to that map is you you're part of like this little cove, this little not cove,
Right.
canyon, I should say, that's there. So that's why I feel like Crash Site does it better than Eden
All right.
in terms of aesthetic,
I am
and it
going
doesn't have
to.
to pay
Sorry.
much to point of interest. But yeah, go for it.
Uh, just to finish off the topic of aesthetics, because we need to go into
Yeah,
like
I kind of want to touch back onto hazards, but yeah,
yeah,
because
we're going to go into
we're
hazards and interaction. So this is going to be like my final closing argument. To hopefully, if anyone's still doubting that Titanfall 1 maps better than Titanfall 2, let me just like say this: a lot of the Titanfall 2 original maps are so similar in aesthetics and design, right? Compared to
mm,
Titanfall 1 maps. So like when you look at Titanfall 2 maps, you got forward base Kodai. Oh, it's a big building essentially. You got Boomtown, which is a litter of buildings like clustered in the middle. You got Homestead, which is a farm and a lot of buildings. And then you got fuck, I need to look at Titanfall 2 maps. You got Exoplanet, which is like three massive buildings. Aside from Crash Site and Glitch, a lot of the Titanfall 2 original maps are just like a lot of buildings, and there's like nothing really interesting about them. They all just kind of blend together, unless you're like a real hardcore like Titanfall player, and you can like the only you know what I will say. The only thing that differentiates these Titanfall 2 maps are the color palettes. Like if all the color palettes were like blue, right?
You change the sky, and all of a sudden you're on a different map.
Yeah, I
No,
mean
I definitely feel that.
that's what the Titanfall 2 maps do though. Like forward base is a building, it's a base during sunset. Homestead is a bunch of buildings during the daytime. Boomtown has like a blue aesthetic in like a simulation dome. And then you compare these to Titanfall 1 maps, and sure, Titanfall 1 maps have a lot of buildings, right? But at the same time, you got maps like Fracture, right? Where the ground is actually split up and it looks like an earthquake has run straight through it. You got destroyed buildings. For Overlook, you have prisons. You have this massive airstrip. You got like a satellite, like buried. You got like a base buried into the side of a cliff, and that makes it more interesting. For Swampland, you have giant fucking trees. For Dig Site, there's a massive drill. For Export, you got a massive like what is it? It's like a water windmill thing, a water mill, um, and like a massive cable, and like a massive like ocean as well. And then I had one more example. It was a map that we already brought up.
Sandtrap?
Not Sandtrap, Boneyard. And then Boneyard, it's a bunch of buildings, sure, but they're buried under massive sand dunes. You got a massive skeleton carcass overlooking the entire map. And so when it comes to aesthetics, again, this is my closing argument. Titanfall 1 maps are far more interesting and far more fun to play on than Titanfall 2 maps, because all the Titanfall 2 maps just kind of blend together because they're just a bunch of buildings. Right, that is me done. That is me and my rant of aesthetics finished.
Yeah, because again, I was gonna just touch real quick on Sandtrap because of the idea that, and this helps me transition to hazards, because Sandtrap doesn't directly have a hazard, but it does have a certain flow where you can kind of run on these undergrounds. They're really close walls. If you somehow fall because you just don't know how to wall run, it's a death pit. I mean, yeah, it's a hazard, but it's the way that, like, when they made the map, everything, like, I mean, even Crash Site does it, where there's certain roundabout ways where if you fail doing this thing, then again, Crash Site has its death pit. It's weird that it has it, but it's there. And it's the idea that obstacles are there, but if you succeed the obstacle, you're rewarded with either a roundabout thing, and it also adds a certain level of immersion to the map and, like, feel to it. So it's one of those things where, and then touching back on aesthetics, just real briefly, uh, Sandtrap has like two layers to it, and it makes it feel like that it isn't just buildings, or this is a crashed ship. I think there's like four maps in the game that are all around crashed ships or something along that
Yeah, there's
nature.
like Lagoon, Relic, for Titanfall 1.
Yeah.
Oh, what else?
So
There are more.
I guess just people
Can't
don't know how to fly, but
remember.
the
Right.
but the idea is that there's other parts to the world. There's other parts of the universe. So it feels good when you're fighting at some place interesting and new. Even though Sandtrap has a lot of out in the open and things like that, you got the bunkers that you can kind of hide behind and
Yeah,
shoot at and
Sandtrap
over.
is like
It's a good map. It's very underrated, very
it is a
underrated.
very
But like,
pleasing map to look at. It actually is quite a beautiful map because it's actually contrasting in colors. I'm looking at like images right now, where the
yeah,
top half is like night sky, the blue moon is like shining down on the surface, and then you have like the oil drills down in the like underground, and they're actually pumping up, like, and there are like really bright orange lights, and so the map
hmm,
is like orange and blue, and like that is such a cool
yeah,
thing. That is such
yeah.
a cool aesthetic.
And you got little wall run spots that help you kind of navigate
Yeah.
the more dangerous Titan areas without, like, as a pilot, without putting yourself directly in the line of sight of
Sandtraps just
dangers.
has like two areas, like two flat dune areas that a pilot goes out there, they're screwed. But like then again, they
Yeah,
got like
exactly.
that underground area,
Yeah.
which is like
So
great as
so
well.
yeah. So touching on Sandtrap and just its overall
Hazards
thing,
and interactions, yeah.
it's got its like death areas, but looking a little bit more into hazards, like export, I feel like maps benefit from it. So like if you had a part
Definitely.
of, because let's say Sand Trap, it's a refueling station. So like let's say you had like these red gas things that if you shoot at, right, like as a Titan, you can do enough damage where it blows up. And if there's any other Titan nearby, maybe like they'll take heavy damage or just outright explode. I mean, there are things that you can do. So it's a tactical hazard that you can deploy to give yourself an advantage. Maybe you can only do it once because once they're exploded, then they exploded. You can take a crash site and there's like engines hanging overhead. Maybe there's like a terminal that a pilot can go to and turn it on and activate a thruster
That
that
would
like
be
will
so
burn for
cool.
like
Yes.
exactly like for like 10 seconds. So like maybe if a Titan's there, it's going to be destroyed, but if there is no
Burned
Titan
to
there, it
death.
cuts off the map for a little bit. So
Yeah.
like just interactions that the player can have with the map to make the map feel a little bit more alive and give it more of an identity would vastly help.
In
And
so,
that's why I feel like hazards may not necessarily be the worst thing for a map because it helps give the map some sort of purpose and identity.
interest, yeah. It makes it
Maybe like
yeah.
take like maybe a reactor map where like part of the map, maybe the center lane, because there's 3 lanes. Maybe the center lane you have to pass through a reactor, and maybe a pilot can like hop off and they can activate the reactor, and in 30 seconds it'll close, and anybody trapped in there will die to like radiation or something like that. But you can also hack it to turn it back on and allow you to travel that middle lane again. So there's like a fight or a struggle between turning it on or off or trying to use the map to your
Right.
benefit kind
And
of
that
deal.
also like coincides with point of interest as well. So because they're all like fighting
Yeah.
over like a specific area of the map.
Yeah. I was
And
talking to you earlier about like a bridge that can either extend or unextend, which not maybe itself is not necessarily a hazard, but it helps extend another lane. It's an interaction you can have with the map.
hmm,
But if you're on the bridge when it unextends and you can't get to the other side, you're either
nearby,
trapped or you fall to your death, or maybe it's like a forge where like you drop in lava or something like that.
yeah.
So
And
maybe you need these bridges or
when it
generators
comes
to
to
be
like
activated.
interactions as well, it doesn't even have to be like anything as complicated as like a massive drawbridge that extends. To make a map just feel better to play on, all you gotta do is like the turrets from Titanfall 1, the zip lines as well. Just like
Yeah.
small little interactions like that that actually make the map feel like it's not just a static thing. Like there are things moving on the map that make it more interesting. And I feel like the turrets, they should have been in Titanfall 2, like
Yeah.
without a doubt. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because I'm going to start talking a little bit about AI. But imagine like activating the turrets actually prevents like AI dropships from dropping in. And like,
Mhm.
wow, that's a thing that you let's say you're on the enemy team.
As a player can do to affect to give the gameplay or the
Yeah, you
map.
actually feel like you're having an impact on how the map plays. And like,
Mhm.
it's so simple to do that. It doesn't have to be like a super complicated thing. Although that would be cool. It can just be like a simple turret you can hack. Or like maybe
And
you hack a panel and a door opens and shuts. Just
and
stuff
there
like that.
is an argument to be said about people being like, well, I don't want to interact with the map because I am a shooty man and I am meant to be a soldier and shoot the bad guys. And if I'm interacting with the map, then I'm not playing a game. I'm playing bridge extending simulator or
Right.
turret turn oner or something like
Well,
that.
yeah, you don't
And
have to like interact with the
you don't
map though.
have to,
Yeah.
but it's an option.
Yeah.
So maybe you don't have to, but your
And
buddy that's really into like, playing the map, and
right.
maybe there's a little bit of strategy there where it's like, again, you turn on the turret, dropships can't land because they just get blown out of the sky. So like
And that
you can
also
turn
gives
tides around.
like players who might not be as good as the game like something to do and feel like they're accomplishing something. It's like
Yeah.
people who might have only just like picked up the game like a week ago. They're not that great. They're not sweating like stim car loadouts and like grapple slingshotting across the map. They can like interact with the map, prevent enemy dropships from coming in, kill AI forces, maybe get occasional like a pilot kill, but like they still feel like they're doing something to impact the game. And they are.
So I'm gonna just a real quick to wrap up, I guess, a little bit of this because I'm gonna step away from the interactions because I feel like we've made our point of
Yeah.
like why they're good for the game. Map layout is also something that's very indicative to the flow of battle
I
and
feel
just
like
everything.
we didn't
So
really touch on layout enough.
yeah, so there's main thing. Well, I mean, we did. We touched on the lanes, but there's also
We
like
didn't really
I think
get our
well,
point
actually
across though, like why
we
it's
we covered it, but we never really drew attention to it. So
yeah.
there are
So
lanes,
we
and
did steer.
like yeah, there are lanes that help maneuver the map, and the whole point of a lane is to give you a channel of movement from one point of the map to the other. There are chokes, which are tight areas, which for one side, for one team, it is very easy to be defensive to stop other enemies from coming to you. I mean, look no further than Eden. There's very good chokes in Eden where like if you're a Scorch, you can just lay fire and block a lane because it's really tight. So
Right.
you kind of force them to either push it or to back off and wait for an opportune time. Or again, like even in Rise, there's chokes because of just the narrow corridors. Like if you're a North Star and you got that tight roof on top of you and there's only that one place, you either backpedal and try to get out, or you try to win the fight. So chokes give you kind of a flight or fight response to areas in the map, which help dictate the flow of battle a little bit more clearly. And then lastly, there's like dead man lands where it's just open areas of the map which are give you snipers great lines of sight. There's a little cover, but there should still be there. It shouldn't directly be like you're out in the middle of nowhere, everybody and their mother can hit you, but it should be like areas that are risky to go through because you're out in the open, but it helps kind of give you a risk versus reward. You're on the south side of the map and you're trying to get a little bit north. You have to gun it through this kind of open area. Deadlands are more open areas to the map where it's a risk for being out there for too long, but there are advantages. That's where the Titans drop in. That's where the troops just drop in through the ships. That's where drop pods land. Uh, just in anything that you can think of happens probably out in an open area. There are downsides to these deadlands, which are like when you go and the far out reaches of the map where there's just nothing and there's no reason to fight out there. You want these open lands to be either center of the map to be a little bit more interesting, or you want them to be in areas that have justifiable means to see traffic of people.
And
So
then you just have Lagoon, which is just a massive open lake
massive.
where at the very edge of the map there's no reason to go there, but it's there and it's cool nonetheless.
Yeah, Lagoon takes it a little bit to the
Yeah.
extreme. Like, is there a reason to be all the way out there? Unless you have a sniper, no.
No, the sniper's not
It,
even useful out there because there's not going to be a pilot out there, and no pilot in their right mind would actually
no, no. I
go
mean,
out
I
there.
mean, like a North Star. Like you're running a quote unquote
All right,
North Star. Like you're
we're
sniping
assuming that
Titan.
Titanfall
Because
2 Titans can play on Titanfall 1 maps.
well, no, no. There is the
Oh
rail
yeah,
sniper
the
in
railgun.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, you said
You
North
you
Star.
use
North Star.
that like the only ranged gun. I mean, you could use the 40 mil,
I
but
mean, yeah, Titans have a reason to be out there, but like, not really pilots.
yeah, and I think and to that kind of adds an interesting aesthetic to the map. Again, it's done to the extreme, but again, it's
I
an
think
area where Titans
Smuggler's
can brawl,
Cove
but
had a similar
doesn't
thing.
matter. Yeah. So,
Forgotten Maps
um,
#1 Smuggler. Yeah.
but yeah, so those are just ways that you can play around with the map and add interesting detail to the map without necessarily it being a bad thing. Like when I say choke points or deadlands, people will probably like be like, "Yeah, but there shouldn't be a deadland in the map because it's a flat area with nothing and all you do is go there and die." Well,
Just
yes and
don't go
no. I
there.
mean, well,
No, just kidding.
but then you have a bald spot on the map that should be filled full of something. No, I mean Deadlands could have purposes in a map. It's just how you have to utilize them. If they're towards the edge of a map, then there's no reason to go out there because it's plain. But if it's in the center of the map where you have to go through to go to the other side, there's a little bit of gameplay. Given it shouldn't be completely dead where you're dooming your Titan by running through it, but you can add a little bit there. You can make it like kind of risky but kind of interesting. Maybe it's a long bridge that only like range Titans can hit. And there's panels that you can activate to make the bridge a little bit more safe and less of a dead land. So like
I think
let's take a small example, small detour. There's a giant dead spot from one side to the other. If a pilot hacks like a thing, you activate these stone barricades, and it helps getting across the deadland easier. So you could do that, but the barricades only stay up for 20 seconds. You add an interesting point to the map, you can help navigate the deadland, and it changes up the flow of battle. So it's something that you could do to get across. If you don't want to do that, then you could risk running across when maybe there's not a whole lot of titans active. It's just how you play the map, I guess.
You're talking about like Deadlands now. So I want to like add my thing onto Deadlands now. I know
Sure.
how I said my favorite map earlier was Export, but I lied. My favorite map is actually Boneyard, and I like forgot about it until I mentioned it. But you're talking about like Deadlands being in the middle of the map, and like Boneyard has that. Boneyard, like I said, is like a giant hole, right? And in the middle of that hole is, guess what? Nothing. There's like one tall rock, essentially, but it's essentially a Deadlands surrounded by like a bunch of buildings, and it
Mhm.
makes like a very interesting flow of the game because like all the titans will be drawn into the center of the map because it's nice and big and open, and pilots will kind of like shimmy around the outskirts. There's like a couple bunkers as well where they can peek into the middle, but like yeah, like Deadlands make for like interesting maps and interesting gameplay, and Boneyard is an
And
example of that.
Boneyard almost nails every single point that we covered.
Yeah,
Because,
Boneyard is the perfect map.
well, so
I'll
so
say that with
the
confidence.
flyers in the map aren't necessarily a hazard, but they're very much a implied hazard. When a new player plays Boneyard, you see these flyers run and they pick up grunts and everything like that. I don't think they'll ever attack you,
Nah, they
but they'll
don't.
attack the AI, which is very much an implied hazard. But there are hazards on it where there's, I believe, one or two turrets in the map
There are two
that you
turrets,
can
yep.
activate. Yeah, that you can activate to shoot. So there are those hazards. There's
And
also that like pit that you mentioned
there's
earlier.
also a bunch
It
of
has
zip lines.
Deadlands.
So, like,
Uh, exactly. There's
it
zip
does
lines.
have
There's
chokes as well, because, like,
yeah, beneath
interiors are
like the
nice and
rib
tight.
cages.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but, like,
So
yeah.
it covers almost everything that we talked about, making it a very like solid map. And it has, given the lanes are a little bit like not super noticeable. It's a little bit more cluttered,
Yeah,
but
well,
there is a 3 lane
you
layout to
don't.
it, if
When,
not
when I was, like,
very
mentioning three
weavy.
lanes earlier, I was just, like, pointing out a thing that most, like, maps these days tend to, like, gravitate towards like three lanes. Like you
Yeah.
don't need to have the three lane system. Like I
Well,
think
yeah, yeah.
some of
Like,
the best maps in like Titanfall don't imply or they don't utilize like three lanes like Boneyard.
well, yeah. Well, take Overlook. Overlook flows better as a circle. Are there 3 lanes? Yes, but it flows better as a circle.
Yeah.
Same thing with Crash Site. Crash Site has 3 lanes, but it flows better as a circle. So the lanes is just how you get from point A to point B. Does it need 1 lane? Does it need two? Does it need three? Are some lanes only pilot based? Are some lanes only Titan based? It's just the idea of how these lanes apply to the map. And if the lane is a giant circle that you're always rotating, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it applies how the movement works for that map. And it should be different for each map, because if you are copy paste every map with 3 lanes, the flow of battle gets redundant. Even though the maps can be very interesting and fun, you have to have other things like, well, what if we add a 4th lane? What if there's only 2 lanes? What if it's just, you know,
No lanes.
what if it's only 1 lane, but
Yeah.
it's a very big open deadland? And Titans have to take pot shots at each other, and it's the upper head is all of pilots. Like only the pilots fight on the upper, but the lower is the Titans, and maybe the pilots activate to change up the dead land so one side gets the advantage on the. There's a lot of things
You
that you can
know.
do
Yeah. Sorry. You
to
finish.
to play around with. Yeah, there's a lot of things you could do with the map to play around with. So having as many lanes as you want is just how you're deciding the flow of the fight. Uh, yeah, and I
Another.
think that covers everything.
Yeah. So one last thing on Deadlands. Another map that has a really good example of a Deadlands is Fracture, which it's
Yeah,
like it's an interesting map because it's like divided by different levels of like terrain because it's like an earthquake has just struck it. But I'm looking at it now and it's like there's like a lower bit with a bunch of buildings, and that's where like you spawn and start the game. And then like you go slightly upper, and it's just this flat area, like completely flat, and there's like a broken sewer tunnel that pilots can traverse through. But like,
And I do think Fracture is a better Boomtown. The buildings are a lot more interesting to run
yes,
through. It's
yes, you're
just
right.
how open the differences between how open certain areas are and how tight certain areas are a lot more unique, and it's just to
Yeah,
me I think it's a better Boomtown.
yeah. I think Fracture and Boomtown are a fair comparison to make because they're two
Yeah,
maps which are like trying to accomplish the same thing, like a small town.
that's been hit by devastation.
Well, yeah, I mean that's like kind of like an aesthetic choice for Fracture, like Boomtown. Oh yeah, I suppose like the simulation dome above has like collapsed, and yeah, there's that broken building. But like, yeah, they're both like trying to accomplish the same thing, but Fracture just does it completely better in every way.
Yeah.
Right.
So
So now, final
and
topic.
then yeah, well, I mean, before we hit the final topic, it's gonna
Right.
be a little bit. Movement and the abilities that you use on them is something to also note on
All
maps.
right.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna go through this really quickly, but we when you make maps, you want to be able to utilize because grapple becomes a very important thing in Titanfall 2. Same thing with stim, but you shouldn't also negate some of the other abilities, even though you're more grunt. So you should let players have fun with certain mechanics. If you give the pilots jetpacks, feel free to like add like vents that they can maybe jetpack into, and only if you have a
I'm
jetpack you can do it
sorry.
or a grapple.
Vent.
Shut up. But maybe like something that could be interesting is maybe there's a wall run area that you can only get past if you have a stim, so you can jump on the wall, and if you have a stim, it gives you just enough speed where you can get from one side of the wall all the way to the other. Given if you could do that with a stim, you could probably do it with the grapple. Grapples are broken, but you get the idea. Just interesting areas of the map that play to certain abilities. Maybe just buildings that are a little bit more adapted to if you have a shield, or maybe some areas that like maybe there's a hologram room that just kind of when you run in there it just does interesting things. It's just you can add certain things that apply to the abilities of the player, so there's interesting things. Movement is huge in PlanetSide, given not every single ability that a pilot
You're talking
has
about
is movement
PlanetSide now.
based. PlanetSide, my bad. I whoops.
Yeah,
Hey guys, play
brain
PlanetSide. Good
moment.
game, very underrated. Titanfall. Titanfall is very movement based, and I can't believe I said that. Titanfall is very movement based, and um, yeah, having these abilities that help you move throughout the map. Given it could lean towards more movement abilities are like becomes meta, but I feel like we're already there. It's just
Yeah.
having aspects of the map that can help contribute to movement based abilities can help. Also having certain like parts of the map, maybe there's like a phase where if you phase, you can move through these iron bars that are not there when you're in the phase dimension, so you can cheat and take little shortcuts throughout the map.
Yeah.
That would be huge if like there's two versions of the map, one that's a phase version and one that's a normal
Wow, that
version,
would
so you can play
actually
the map.
be quite interesting to see. Yeah.
So anyway, having maps play around a movement and abilities of the player can be very huge. I think lastly the point that we're coming up on is spawns and AI,
AI.
which is
Yes.
just huge. We'll hit AI first, and then I think we'll wrap it up with
I
spawns.
don't know. They both kind of like.
They kind of
Oh
go
yeah.
hand in hand, but
Yeah.
I feel like
We'll
spawns are
just
probably the least
talk about
impactful.
it. I mean, let's just get spawns out of the way with now because I think they relate more to like maps than AI do. So
So I guess the way spawns should be handled along maps is, for me,
before we
I'm
talk
not
about it, can I
huge.
like explain my quick start like concept, right?
Sure.
So well, there's this concept called a quick start, right? So like when you die in a multiplayer match, the screen turns black and white, and then there's the kill cam that pops up. You can skip it or watch it, but whatever. And then you respawn in one of the designated zones. and you want to get back into the action as quickly as possible. And the idea of quick starts is that spawns and map design will accommodate each other, so when a player respawns, they can have a quick route they can take to get back into the action as quickly as possible. Instead of like spawning on like a building at the outskirts and you have to traverse through a lane that doesn't have any wall running routes or any like anything that can give you like a boost of movement. I think the worst maps that have this like they don't have a quick start are Colony and Dry Dock, which I talked to you about, Theorist. But
Yeah.
Dry Dock, you spawn on a building on either end, right? For both teams, this isn't just one team exclusive, and there's just this flat area where Titans can pass through, and there's no wall running routes, and you have to cross it no matter what to get to the center of the map where you can actually start wall running. And unless you got grapple or stim, you're gonna have a very hard time crossing this. So a quick start should be respawning on top of the building, and right next to it is like a hanging, like a broken part of a ship, for example, that's being hanged by like a crane, and you can wall run onto it straight away and get back into the action as possible. And when the player is moving, they're engaged, and when they're just like walking across like a land, it's just
Well,
for someone
it's the
like
idea
me, it's
of
like the worst thing.
it's the idea that you spawn into Lagoon and you're out in the middle of the ocean and you're just like, well, it's going to be about 30 seconds before I hit dry land to even get back into the fight. So it's like one of those a quick start. Into your definition is you're able to get into a fight or into movement. You're able to,
Into
I
movement,
guess,
I think,
play
yeah,
the game. You're able to
yeah,
play the game within like 2 seconds of spawning in. Like
yeah.
you move and you can be wall running on something amongst 2 seconds or 3 seconds or what have you. So
That's
yeah.
my concept for a quick start, and I think spawns
But,
should allow for a quick start.
so but this is the quick start on you died and you spawned in. This isn't necessarily where the matches just started and you're spawning in for the first time. Because like I said when I was telling you earlier is that I think it's okay to have a small slow-ish warm up where maybe you have to walk into the map like 2 or 3 feet
To
before you
like
jump onto a building.
to like the start of the game where you like come
Yeah,
out of the
it's
dropship.
just the
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. It's
like
the
I
starting
think
area.
I
Gives you a
think
second to crack your knuckles and adjust to the map that you're in. Exactly.
and
So
ironically, I mentioned Colony doesn't have a quick start, but when the game first starts, the drop ships actually spawn in closer to the cluster of buildings in the middle, and so there is no quick start for. I mean, there is a quick start to the beginning of the game because grapple pilots will be able to slingshot straight away coming out of the dropship and get to the enemy side in like 2 seconds flat. And when that
yep.
happens and there's no warm up, it's like, oh, it's one of those games. And I think everyone on the enemy team is just miserable because they don't get that like 10-second breathing room at the start of the game because a man just slingshots to the other side. So
Yeah, and I think that's also kind of what helps like slower starts. If
uh,
it's a map where you can get in, well, I mean slower starts in that like the first spawn. I guess we should just
right,
call it like first spawn starts.
first spawn starts, yeah.
So yeah,
Colony
so
is
like
an example of a bad first spawn start. Is what I'm trying to say.
because yeah, if you pick a certain tactical, you join the fight faster than anybody else. So because you can just grapple into and get to the center of the map and pull off your sick 360 no scope. Crash site I think is fine because both teams can do that. But if it's leaned towards one side having a better start than the other, there is a kind of lackluster
Ah,
fun to it.
yeah.
But what I was getting into with the idea of uh it's okay to have like a slower initial spawn. It's just any spawn after that should be a lot quicker to get into the fight.
Yeah.
And I was essentially getting into that the players should choose or have at least the ability in how they want to engage in spawning into the map. Each with each with different like benefits to it. So one of them could be that the next drop ship that comes in, you spawn on, you're able to jump out, and there's that. benefit could be that the grunts or the specters that spawn on it will be part of your team. Like they will join you, they will follow you. They're automatically part of you when you spawn in. Or you can have a drop pod, that being where you get to choose where you want to be on the map. When you drop pod in, you just say, I want to drop pod here. And it's up to the player. Maybe you drop pod in a
Yeah.
bad spot, maybe pick a better spot that
And
isn't so
I
hot
don't
next time.
hate this idea of like multiple ways of spawning in either. I think it's actually a very cool idea and it helps to retain immersion as well instead of just manifesting your body in like a corner of the map. Like
Yeah.
uh so like that pretty much covers the spawn idea. We got our
Yeah,
last
well, I mean,
topic.
the other one would be that you spawn on a buddy, which is, I think, manifesting your
Oh, right.
body all of a sudden
Right,
on
right,
the
right.
buddy.
But like the buddy
So,
spawn thing was a way to like complement the quick start concept
yeah,
because if you can just spawn on a buddy who's already inside like the map, like the center of the map, you spawn on him and like bam, you're off. You're like going with him and you get into a fight like 5 seconds later. So like
maybe.
I
I mean, you could
think
still like add like an aesthetic spawn to it. Maybe you phase in or something like that. Maybe it's a phase in
yeah, but
or a
like
teleport, or like
it doesn't
the
really matter
capital ship
how you
teleports
get
you.
there.
Yeah,
Just like the buddy
it's
system,
just
I
that you're
think
there.
is a better
Yeah,
alternative to like spawning at designated spots in the map.
yeah.
And
So it gives
you
you
can do
options though.
that, or you can go into a drop ship with grunts and like zip line out, or you can get the drop pod, or you can call in your Titan. Just like multiple ways to spawn in. Yeah, that's pretty much.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Speaking of grunts, AI. And
Yay.
AI is important for map design because it actually dictates like flow, right? Kind
Yeah.
of. Not like
More. Yeah.
more or less, but
I
AI
mean,
is
it's different to
just
say because attrition is mostly AI
yeah.
based, but attrition is a huge part
I
of
think
the game in general. But in like game modes where Last Titan Standing or Pilot versus Pilot,
yeah.
you're not really going to see grunts, but
You're not
there
gonna
is
see
nothing.
grunts. There's no
Yeah,
grunts. But I
yeah.
don't know.
So, but
The
there is
AI
something
thing,
still to be said about how AI can be more impactful to the game.
yeah. So it's not really like anything. I mean, you could count them as map hazards or interactables if you really wanted to, but I
Yeah,
don't know.
every
It's
AI is a map hazard.
we mainly just came up with this AI idea, right? As like all of a sudden, and we're like, oh, we need to like share this idea before we forget it. Main thing, because so like
Yeah.
let's get it. AI needs to be more impactful and have an actual purpose for being in the game because what they try to do in Titanfall 2 is like you have different tiers of AI. Like you got the grunts, you got the specters, you got stalkers and reapers, and each one is more challenging than the last. And they're dropped in by the enemy team when they're behind and they're losing. And so they're supposed to be like a counterbalance to help the losing team, try and turn things around. Now, the thing is, the AI is so stupid and so bad that they don't actually contribute to your team in any good way. In fact, the only thing they do is provide more things for the enemy to shoot at and get more points. So we came up with this idea that has AI contribute score to the team and actually help the losing team more and be more impactful to the flow of a game. And that is with the idea of AI pairing, which I will allow you to explain since you came up with it.
So
So,
if you're in a map, right, and you let's say spawn near or around like either specters or grunts, just to give flat stats to something, let's say a grunt has 25 accuracy, so them shooting at a player, they will only hit 25% of the time, and maybe they have only 100 health. If the player stays around or within a vicinity, let's say 10 meters or
10
so
meters, yeah.
of these grunts, the grunts will pair to you. They will become attached, and the player will be notified of this. And what essentially happens is they the game will tell these grunts, because you're with this pilot, you're going to be a little bit more impactful to the game. instead of 25% accuracy, you're going to get 50. Instead of 200 health, you're going to get 100. Or sorry,
Instead of
instead of
100, you get
100, you're going to
200.
get 2.
Yeah.
So you're going to be in the combat in the game. You're going to have more weight. So when a player comes by with that smart pistol, instead of it being one lock to kill a grunt, it's going to be two. So it's going to eat a Zambo a little bit
Not
more, and
like it's
maybe
gonna make a difference for a smart
like it's going to
pistol,
make it.
but
Hey, you know what?
the
It will.
idea is that the AI can now contribute points to the team, and any
Yeah.
points they get are awarded to the player that they're paired
Yeah.
with. And so,
For example, and if let's say you're
and they
shooting at
become
another
more
pilot, the
effective. Yeah.
pilot happens to kill you first, but you leave him on incredibly low health. Because you gave those grunts because they were following you an accuracy bonus of 50%, they might be that much more likely to score the kill shot on that grunt, thus giving you as a player an extra kill. So and then that will count to the score and that will apply to attrition.
And now
For
we talk
specters, it will
about
be a little bit different because specters will get the ability to follow you to a better capacity that grunts can. They have a
like
little bit more
going on
health
top
than
of
grunts. So,
rooftops and like
yeah,
being faster in
and
general. Yeah.
yeah, and not just that, there is something to be said that you can hack enemy specters. So there is a little bit of a risk to it, so that someone can hack your specters and gain your benefits. But that's part of the fun.
Yeah.
That specters are a little bit
Just
stronger.
cope.
So you have grunts. You have grunts, which borderline give you something as a flat, and they're not bad to have. Specters, like,
They're more efficient grunts.
yeah, they're more efficient grunts, but they also have downsides. Arc grenades will do a lot more damage to
Yeah.
them. You
It'll
can
like
hack
fry
them
their
to,
circuits or something.
yeah, exactly.
And then
But
you got stalkers,
yeah,
which you know how like stalkers, they have like this running animation. You see it in Frontier Defense and in the campaign. Like maybe the stalkers have a different attack method compared to specters or grunts. So when a group of stalkers become paired to you, and you start attacking an enemy pilot, these stalkers will drop everything and just bolt straight towards the pilot, and the second they get into range, they'll start blowing up. And so they're super aggressive on the enemy player, and that gives you a lot of breathing room. And if the stalkers don't kill him, then you'll have a much easier time killing him yourself because he might be weaker during the explosions. And if you're fighting a titan, maybe the stalkers or specters, because specters were able to do it in Titanfall 1, they can actually start rodeoing the enemy titan and start like pulling apart its armor or something and doing damage to them. And so it's just AI being more impactful into a game. And
exactly.
you also had the idea that AI could rodeo you and be like little sentry turrets, which I thought was a pretty funny idea.
Yeah, so
Uh,
like specters, like maybe specters, you get like two of them, but if they're like stalkers, maybe you get like three that are able to hop on your, just to make stalkers because they're a little bit stronger, they're a little bit more. I want to say smart, but they also kill themselves 90% of the time.
yeah, I mean the
But
AI in Titanfall is just pretty stupid
yeah,
in general.
so yeah, but they can hop on you and they act as like little point, like they'll only shoot at like grunts or whatever unless they have a Titan weapon for some reason, which I do think that going into grunts, I do think,
They should
let's
have
say,
archers, or like
yeah.
one
So
grunt in a squad should have archers or anti-titan
so
weapons. I agree.
so just to touch on grunts in as a whole, when a grunt squad jumps down, I think it should be from 4 to 5. I think one of them should be a grunt captain that maybe has like a front facing shield if they need it or not, depending on the
I
difficulty.
think
Like you can have,
maybe at the start of a game that won't be necessary, but like maybe
won't be
as the
necessary,
like
but like,
game goes on, you get to see grunt captains be introduced
yeah,
like about halfway
but like,
through, because like straight away, I don't know,
yeah,
might
but
be a
like
little difficult.
again, the idea of a grunt captain would still be there.
Yeah, yeah,
So
in multiplayer,
you
of
would,
course.
yeah, so you would have that. Maybe you'd have the sharpshooter of the group, maybe so he carries either a DMR or something. You have like the assault rifle guy, so like the other, I guess, grunt, and then you have maybe an anti-titan weapon guy in the back, and then maybe a grenader guy. Just, you have a squad of 5 people that all specialize in a particular field or whatever.
Right.
So specters should do the same. Stalkers and specters should do the same to a certain capacity.
Maybe
Maybe there
if
isn't
you
a
get like a specter group to follow you, there's an option to have them like set up, and they can turn into mortar specters. Like
Yeah,
from Frontier Defense, that might be just something cool that they can do, and adds a bit of strategy.
yeah. Or if you just like happen to sit in an area, they'll just do it naturally. Like
Yeah.
there's I guess things. So, but yeah, if you're in your Titan, because that was the other thing that kind of seemed weird is when you always got like follower specters on you because you used Wi-Fi virus or whatever. They wouldn't. They would follow you, but it's like they prioritize following you. But Titans are a lot faster, so they would always be playing catch up, and at the same time they just run into obstacles and get themselves killed. They just felt useless. So yeah, they like stalkers or specters should be able to jump and rodeo you, and they shoot them. You can shoot them off, but like they're a little bit stronger because they're protected by your shields. So it gives rodeo a little bit more of a play style. Plus, if an enemy's trying to rodeo you, they have to shoot the robots off you first to hop on you, making it a little bit tougher. So but going into a little bit of a different thing. So yeah, specters would work different. Uh, the idea of that being, let's say, whatever you shoot at, they shoot at. But if an enemy pilot kills you, they become enraged, and then they'll chase down that pilot trying to kill themselves, or
They turn into bombers,
run
suicide
like
bombers.
yeah. Yeah, they turn to suicide bombers. Like they try to avenge your death.
Suicide
So if
specters.
you die, yeah. And then if you're again in your Titan and let's say they kill your Titan, maybe you run over to the enemy Titan and blow it up. But if you're a pilot and you're attacking a Titan, maybe they do the same thing. Like there's ways that you can give kind of AI a certain personality and
Just
like
interesting things they can do. Yeah.
yeah, and we should be able to see them have AI versus AI interactions when you're running through buildings. There was a lot of it in Titanfall 1, but not so much in Titanfall 2, where like they would have these interactions where like you see two grunts fighting and sparring. We should be able to see a lot more of that.
Yeah.
Uh,
All that,
maybe if you
yeah, I've
help
seen
out a
like
grunt,
behind the scenes for that, and all the motion capture that they do for like grunt on grunt like fights and like Spectre on grunt fights, and it's so fascinating.
yeah. But like, let's say like you stumble across one of those encounters, right? And it's like a grunt losing to a specter. So if you shoot the specter and kill the specter, maybe the grunt gets happy and he follows you around now. So you can do interesting things like that. Just add more dynamic to the game.
Right. I think that pretty much covers like all the topics today.
Yeah, that
Uh,
roughly rounds out everything. I mean, if we miss something, oh no, we missed. This has been running for almost, I think, an hour and a half.
yeah,
I
this
hope
this is about an hour. Um,
so.
so we're gonna call
Do
this
we have
here.
any? Do you have any closing statements or arguments or
No,
whatever?
I do not. Yeah, so that was episode 4 of the Frontier Workshop podcast.
Oh,
That was
I guess we got to cover Reapers, but whatever. Reapers are different.
Reapers are Reapers.
Reapers will always be Reapers,
They will always
but
be a pain in the ass, and they will always be a
yeah,
nuisance to fight.
I guess the key thing to cover is Reapers will not follow you around, either in a Titan or whatever. Reapers have their own brain. They will do whatever. They'll spawn ticks. They'll be in a nuisance. Maybe they're slightly easier to kill, but Reapers are Reapers. They'll act very much the same that they do in Titanfall 2, maybe with like one or two different quirks to it, but regardless, the thing is about the lesser grunts because I don't think there's any argument whether or not Reapers have an impact on the battlefield considering how annoying they are to
Yeah.
deal with. So, yeah.
So, uh,
I just, that's all I forgot. I knew I forgot one thing.
yeah.
That's what it was.
Well,
Feel
I
free
think.
to wrap this up before I interrupt you with anything
Yeah,
else.
just shut up.
Shut.
That'll be all for today. Thank you for joining in to this Frontier Workshop podcast. Uh, Next time, I don't know what we're going to be talking about next time, but maybe you guys can let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to join the Frontier Workshop Discord as well. You'll get notified whenever I go and make a new video. You could be a part of the Titanfall 3 concept process, all that interesting stuff. You can meet some new people. And if you have the North Star client, we also have our own server that you can be a part of as well. So yeah, definitely go check it out. But thank you for Theros for joining me in yet another podcast episode.
No problem. And
And
if anybody has like any thoughts or questions, feel free to join the server and tell us what you think or tell us something that we might have missed in
Yeah.
our long debates because it helps us out
It's
and
not
it's
just
a
for
good way.
us. These podcasts are for like all your wonderful ears to like, listen to.
It's to get the community thinking and
Yeah.
experimenting with
Amen.
how Titanfall is a big game and how it's had impacts and ways to expand the universe.
So
And
yeah, we definitely want to
there
make
will
sure
never be
that
a Titanfall 3 maybe, but there's always like the thoughts of if we put all this content out there, maybe some modder developer will find
maybe Respawn
the
will be like,
yeah,
wow, we should
yeah,
make
Respawn
Titanfall
will be
3.
like yeah, Respawn will look at us and be like, these kids know what they're talking about, they're passionate,
These
let's make it for
18-year-old kids can make a game better than we can.
them. These
Anyway,
hooligans, yeah.
that'll be
But
all
yeah,
for today. Thank you again, Theorus, and until next time, yeah, we'll see you on the next one. So goodbye, everyone.
adios amigos.
And